Well, it's been a year since we've lost Robin Williams, and I know it seems a little weird to do this 1 year after his death, but here's the thing. Sometimes you don't realize how much you really miss someone until after they're gone for a while. Like, I remember when Roger Ebert died, I remember I was sad, but it wasn't until months later when all these movies were coming out, and it's like, I kind of want to know Roger Ebert's opinion on them, and I realized he's not there anymore. And that is how I feel about Robin Williams. He made such an impact on me that it's just becoming harder to believe he's just not with us anymore. To give you a little history, Robin Williams was one of the first celebrities that I learned to recognize. When you're a kid, you just don't think of these people as like, you see movies and you see shows, but you don't always think about like who's behind them when you're a kid. And Robin Williams was one of the first guys that I learned to recognize him as Robin Williams. To me, I knew he wasn't just Mrs. Doubtfire, I knew he wasn't just the genie, I knew that he was Robin Williams. And he's had a pretty big impact on like my comedy and my performances. Like, I'm sure that anybody who's watched a lot of my videos have probably noticed that I kind of keep the potty talk out of like my vlogs and a lot of the other videos I do, but when I do my stand-up, I'll turn the air blue with obscenities. And Robin Williams was actually a big influence on that, and that's one of the reasons I think he was such a great performer. He could be this wonderful, magical screen presence that could be a children's entertainer, he could be an adult's entertainer, and for me, I think a lot of you may already know what the first time I saw him in. The first time I ever saw him was in Aladdin. And I'm not just bringing that up because it's the first time I ever saw him, but for me, that is also just the quintessential Robin Williams performance. He was, in terms of just owning a performance, that's what Robin Williams did as the genie in Aladdin. He was just so funny, and that role was just so him. Like Dan Castellaneta, when Robin Williams wouldn't come back for the sequel and the TV series. I like Dan Castellaneta and all, but it's one of those things where it's like, if you want to see how hard Robin Williams was to imitate, just looking at someone who is talented like Dan Castellaneta trying to do Robin Williams' act. Robin Williams was just a hard act to follow, and the fact that the fact that he just owned a voiceover performance. There's a lot of talk about whether or not celebrities should do voiceover in movies, and I think about the few times when, owning a performance, I think is already hard enough, when it's like, you can't imagine anyone else playing that part, like Peter Falk as Columbo, or Jeff Bridges as the Dude, but when it's animated, and, it's just their voice, and you don't actually see them, but, you still associate the character that strongly. I really can't think of a ton of times where a famous actor has just completely owned a voiceover performance like that. I mean, one of the few that comes to mind was Vincent Price as Professor Ratigan, and I watched so many of his movies as a kid. Like Mrs. Doubtfire was one of my favorites as well, and that's another one where Robin Williams just owned it and completely ran with the character and was so funny in that movie. And going back to what I said about how Robin Williams could be both a a sweet family presence and a not so family friendly performer, I read on IMDb that he improvised so much that in addition to the PG-13 cut we know and love, that there was a PG edit, an R-rated edit, and the one I badly want to see, an NC-17 edit. I heard he did the same thing on Aladdin, that he improvised some dialogue that would never be in a Disney movie, but I would just love to see the NC-17 edit of Mrs. Doubtfire. If for no other reason than I kind of want to know how vulgar you have to get an NC-17, but I digress. And I remember I remember when I was a kid, I would see those movies and then I would see his stand-up specials on Comedy Central, which were so funny, but it's like, wow, this is not the guy this is not the guy I saw in Fern Gully or Aladdin. And those are so great. I also, even when he could bring it down and be a little more family friendly, he was on Whose Line Is It Anyway? If you can find his performance on Whose Line Is It Anyway, I really recommend it. He is so funny on that show. I just love when they play, "What is Robin Williams thinking?" He steps in, "I have a career, what am I doing?" And although I'm sorry to say I haven't watched as much Mork and Mindy as I should have, my mom DVR'd a few episodes for me after his death, but so I watched a little more after that. And you know, that's the role that really put him on the map as an actor, and it's easy to see why he got that role, because you know, he's playing an alien, and he has to, you know, he's got to have this otherworldly quality about him, and you know, just the rapid fire way he delivers his dialogue, and the fact that you just buy that he's just so out there, that he's really not of this earth. And I saw him in a lot of other movies as a kid. Like he was in Jumanji, which I really liked as a kid. I still like that movie. I still think it holds up as a really entertaining movie. And when I was a kid, I remember Good Will Hunting came out. And I remember being really surprised that he was in that movie, because I was only 9 when that movie came out, so I hadn't seen his more serious films yet, and I didn't discover Good Will Hunting until I was in college, and I'm really glad I saw that movie, because it was a different face of Robin Williams. He played someone who was a little more intellectual, he was a little more subdued, but he still showed off his jokey side. And and as many people know, that was the movie that Robin Williams got his Oscar for, and I'm very glad about that. He definitely deserved his Oscar. I know it wasn't his first nomination. He was also nominated for Dead Poet Society, which I actually saw before I saw Good Will Hunting. That was I saw that when I was in high school, I believe, and I thought that was a great movie. I have the DVD. Robin Williams in that movie is just, the teacher we all wish we had. I mean, who wouldn't want Robin Williams as their teacher? But great movie. Again, it's kind of like what I said about Good Will Hunting, where he's someone who's very intellectual, very smart, someone who can just rally up all these students, but, he still has some funny lines here and there. And the other movie he got the Academy Award nomination was for Good Morning Vietnam, which is another movie I discovered. I was kind of late to the party. I actually saw that a little after I saw Good Will Hunting, but I know that a lot of facts were changed between the real Adrian Cronauer's life and what we see in Good Morning Vietnam. But for me, the question often comes up, how much should you change in a biopic? Well, the thing about Good Morning Vietnam is that even if you separate the facts about Adrian Cronauer's life and what's in the movie, you still get a very satisfying movie. And Robin Williams' performance in that movie, I mean, as someone who had seen a lot of Robin Williams' performances and seen so much of his work, so much of his stand-up, so many of his movies, I remember when I first watched this rapid fire delivery of his first broadcast, I remember my jaw dropping at just what he could do in that short burst of time. It was like, wow. And Good Morning Vietnam is just such a great movie, and for me, that's one of the things that I think makes Robin Williams that's one of the things that I think made Robin Williams such a great presence. He could be someone who is just so wild and uncontrollable and and just this human cartoon. I mean, but he could also be subdued. He could be quiet. He could be gentle. He could be kind. But I discovered I discovered more and more of his serious films. Like I discovered films like Insomnia and 1 Hour Photo, and it's like, wow, he can really play some dark and disturbed characters. Like Insomnia is a really good movie, and I really recommend it. Same with 1 Hour Photo may kind of get glossed over for the fact that its premise is kind of dated in a day and age of digital cameras. Like, it came out in the early 2000s, like right before digital cameras were becoming commonplace. So it kind of has the rotten luck of having a kind of dated premise, but it is such a good movie, and Robin Williams just has these long extended scenes where he has no dialogue, but he still just exudes this character, and he says nothing, but we still get his presence and his demeanor and the fact that he communicates that without any dialogue. And that's saying something for someone who's known for his gift of gab and for being a great talker. And I am hoping that more generations discover Robin Williams, because even though even though the first one came out when I was in college, I became a big fan of the Night at the Museum movies, and he played Teddy Roosevelt in them, and it's amazing watching his performance in that, because you have one of the most recognizable actors in the world playing a real-life person, one of my favorite historical figures, I might add. And you know what? I buy him in it. I buy him as Teddy Roosevelt. I buy him as this dashing, adventurous, gift for gab. And it's kind of ironic that my favorite movie in the franchise, the second Night at the Museum, has the least amount of Robin Williams, but well, you can't win them all, though. Though even in the second movie, even though he didn't have a ton of screen time, he still had a lot of funny lines like, "Oh, well, why don't you talk to the other Teddy Roosevelt since he has arms?" And I also have to bring up the Night at the Museum movies, because I saw Night at the Museum 3 in theaters when it first came out, and I remember feeling this sadness at thinking it was going to be the last film I would see Robin Williams in while it was in theaters. I know he also made Boulevard, but I know he also made Boulevard, and that's coming out later. But you know, realizing that, but you know, there was a certain sadness at you know, seeing this person who meant so much to me, meant so much to other people, because whether or not I ever see Boulevard, I mean, it was still the first movie I saw in theaters after his death, so either way, it was just so sad knowing he's not with us anymore. I mean, Robin Williams wasn't one of those guys who I just liked and forgot about. I mean, I mean, up to his death, I was quoting his movies, I was watching his movies. I mean, I watched The Fisher King pretty recently before his death, and I just remembered that's another movie he got an Academy Award nomination for. Really great movie where Robin Williams plays this man who's been affected by the death of his wife, and it's another one of those performances that you feel like only Robin Williams could do. And I remember one time for an acting workshop, I was actually called on to recreate a scene from that movie, and you know, going back to what I said, it's like, oh, how do you expect me to recreate Robin Williams? I can't. I mean, but in terms of him being able to play someone who's both really funny and really subdued, I mean, another movie I was watching around the time I watched The Fisher King, I remember watching The Birdcage around that time, and I remember reading that Robin Williams actually wanted to play the part he does play in that movie because he kind of wanted a break from playing wild characters. I mean, he plays the more down-to-earth and subdued of the two characters, especially since he's playing off of Nathan Lane. And, you know, even though he still has funny lines and funny moments in that movie, you know, you buy him as someone who is more subdued, someone who can call the shots and be fatherly, but still be warm and still be friendly and still be a good person. And you know, right before he died, I also saw Popeye for the first time, and you know, that was I know it's not, I know Popeye isn't a lot of people's favorite movies, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was so funny. I thought Robin Williams was perfectly cast. I mean, again, he's playing one of the most iconic cartoon characters ever. And he's believable in the role. I mean, he has so many funny scenes like that boxing match, and a lot of the songs in that movie are really good, like the I Am What I Am song. There are so many funny lines in that movie. But, you know, it wasn't just what he did on camera that made Robin Williams special. I heard so many stories about him being just about some of the things he did when there were no cameras around. I mean, he donated to St. Jude's Hospital, he performed for our troops, and one story I thought was just absolutely sweet was when he was working on the film Jack. There was a kid who just didn't want to come out of his car, and Robin Williams actually came to him and he told him, I forget exactly what he said. You can read this story on IMDb, but he basically told him, listen, I'm going to be your funny double today, and if you don't want to come out, that's fine. And he actually talked the kid into wanting to come out of the car, and I thought that was just so sweet. And when he did a guest spot on Louie, I mean, he only had a cameo on that show, but he was still enjoyable. He was so impressed with the way the crew did their job and everybody performed. He actually gave back the money he made for that show. So, I mean, knowing all that, when I heard the news about his death, I remember, I mean, well, I hate to admit this, but the first thing I thought, it just seemed so unreal to me that I just had to double check a source. I Googled it, it's like, this has got to be a hoax. I mean, it doesn't exactly help that, you know, a lot of, I'm sorry to say this, but 2014 was a year where a lot of people seemed to be dying, and a lot of people were, and there were a lot of hoaxes. Like, I remember shortly before Robin Williams, somebody said that The Undertaker had died, and that was a hoax, fortunately. And so I just had to look it up. It's like, no, this has got to be a hoax. This couldn't have happened, and it wasn't. It was real. I mean, someone who had made me laugh, someone who had made me cry, someone who I loved since I was a kid, someone who was just such a great family entertainer, but also such a great actor, that he can transcend that and be entertaining to adult audiences. And, you know, a lot of those movies I was talking about, like Aladdin, Mrs. Doubtfire, you know, I love those movies when I was a kid. They still hold up. They're still funny movies. I still admire Robin Williams' energy, and finding out that someone like that was no longer with us, it was hard to accept. I mean, you know, people talk about the stages of grief. That when I was a kid, I remember I didn't understand what bargaining meant. Like, I remember there was a joke on Ren and Stimpy where Stimpy was going through the stages of death, and he goes through bargaining, and the joke is he's bargaining off all of his old stuff, and so I didn't get what bargaining meant, and suddenly Robin Williams was the first person who I actually remember bargaining. I went through a bargaining phase after he died. It was like, please, 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 just come out and tell us it was all a hoax and we'll forgive you. But it just wasn't the case. He was really gone. And, you know, I mean, normally when someone famous that I like dies, I mean, normally I watch, like, a movie of theirs. Like, when Leonard Nimoy died this year, I watched Star Trek 4. When Christopher Lee died, I watched one of the Dracula movies he made. When Robin Williams died, I went through a practical marathon of his movies. I watched Aladdin, I watched Jumanji, I watched When Dreams May Come, which I remember reading a lot of people watched that movie because after he died, because it's about him dying, and it was just such a weird film to watch. I mean, I've heard some people criticize that movie for being a little too schmaltzy. I think it's a great movie. I think it's just I think it's just a great example of what can be done with a visual medium, because it's so imaginative, and the movie looks gorgeous. It's seriously one of the best looking movies I've ever seen in my life. And Robin Williams is just so good in the movie because he seems to be like the perfect example of someone who we can picture as just having this wonderment in the afterlife. And there's one movie I don't think that I really liked, but I can't see myself watching it for a while. I'm thinking of World's Greatest Dad, just because it's kind of a touchy subject with what the movie's about. If you know what it's about, I'm not gonna pick at any wounds. I mean, it is a very funny movie, and it's a very good black comedy, but with what the movie's about, I don't know if I can bring myself to watch it for a while. I mean, I watched so many of Robin Williams' movies after his death that, you know, it happened around the time of Robert De Niro's birthday, and De Niro is one of those actors I'm a big enough fan of that I actually celebrate his birthday by watching one of his movies. And I was kind of kicking myself in the head because I don't have the movie Awakenings. And it's like, man, that would have been perfect. A Robin Williams tribute and celebrating De Niro's birthday. But it just wasn't meant to be at the time. And while we're on the subject, you know, I guess I have to address the elephant in the room and talk about how Robin Williams died. And you know, there's no easy way of saying this. It was a suicide, and that just hurt so much, that someone who had meant so much to me, someone who had brought so much happiness into my life, someone who had brought so much happiness into other people's lives, was so unhappy that he took his own life. And you know, I've seen this quote a lot on my Facebook, where people will post something saying that that, you know, it's the people who are the unhappiest that want to make other people happy because they know how it feels. And I think that's a really good analogy. I mean, I remember I was talking I was talking about how I watched so many of his movies and felt sad about his death. This may sound like a weird movie to be the last one to talk about, but the one movie that, even though I absolutely love, I just had a hard time bringing myself to watch again, was Hook. And I really like Hook. Again, it's a perfect example of a great movie that Robin Williams was in that I loved as a kid. I still think it holds up, but I had kind of a hard time watching it because Robin Williams died pretty shortly after Bob Hoskins died, and so the wound of Bob Hoskins dying was still pretty fresh for me as well. So it's like, seeing Robin Williams and Bob Hoskins together, I love both of those guys so much that I think seeing them together is just going to make me sad. And eventually I relented to watch Hook again because it's like, their deaths were sad, but their work made me happy. I mean, Dr. Seuss once said that you shouldn't frown because something's over, you should smile because it happened. And that's how I felt about it. That, it's sad they're gone, but let's remember them for what they did. And on my final note, one of my favorite quotes about Robin Williams after his death was something Todd in the Shadows said, that there are celebrities out there where we have a second one, or there's someone like them. We had one Robin Williams. And, like he said in the song, we ain't never had a friend like him, and we'll probably never have another one. So Robin, wherever you are, this one's for you.